welcome if you're here for the first time. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to sew together this Oscar de la Renta-ish top. Now, I've already done a video on how to make the pattern for this top, so be sure to check that video out first before watching this video. I absolutely love the turnout, and it did not take that much time to make. Once you have your pattern down, you pretty much have to sew just a few stitches and you're done. So let's go right ahead and get started already. Now don't forget to subscribe and also turn on your notifications so that you are aware whenever I make new diary entries. Give this video as many likes as you can if you want to see more of these kind of videos from me, and I am always super eager to hear from you in the comment section below. My name is Ijoma and welcome to my sewing diary. The materials you will need are your completed Oscar de la Renta pattern, measuring tape, Tailors chalk, fabric scissors, pins, matching thread for sewing, your fabric of choice. I used about 2 yards of fabric, lining fabric. I used less than a yard of this because of how I'll be cutting the bodies. Now you'll also need 2 long 1 inch wide interface and invisible zip. I'll leave the full list as well as all associated links in the description box below. Cut your fabric according to the instructions on your pattern. Now, the way I decided to line the top is to use my lining fabric for the top half, while the bottom half of the front and back will be lined with the main fabric. So I'll be cutting 2 of the bottom, front and back pieces on the main fabric. Now the instruction says 1, and this is assuming you are cutting on main and lining, or not using a lining at all. Now you also need to cut 2 draping pieces. So my draping pieces were 2 rectangles of 14 by 21 for the back and 19 by 21 for the front. The length is longer than needed, but I wanted to have flexibility. You can make yours wider if you want. Then go ahead and mark notches at all seam intersections, end of the darts, and waist. Transfer the darts from your paper to the wrong side of your main and lining fabric by passing pins through the dart on the paper and your fabric like so. Carefully take off your pattern paper while still ensuring the pins are in place. Then, on the left and right side of each front and back piece, go ahead and mark the pin placements with your Tailors chalk on the wrong side before completely taking off the pins. Pin your darts in place. On the front bodice, you'll be pinning your bust dart at the lowered bust point and at the end of the bust dart. And for your waist dart, you should pin at the lowered waist bust point, the waist, and end of the waist dart. Do this for the main and lining pieces. On each of your back pieces, you'll be pinning at the top of the back waist dart, the waist, and end of the dart. Also do this for the main and lining pieces. Sew all your darts in place and press down. For the front pieces, you'll be pressing the bust darts down and the waist darts towards the center front. For the back pieces, you'll be pressing the waist darts towards the center back. On the front pieces of the main and lining fabric, join the top to the bottom piece at the lowered waistline by placing right side on right side and matching all notches. When you're done, sew all pinned areas with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press your seam allowance open afterwards, and then set this aside. Also join the top back pieces to the corresponding lower pieces at the lowered waistline. Stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press all seams open afterwards. Pin your 1 inch wide interface strips at the wrong side of the center back of your main fabric only and press down with your steam iron to stick. Set this aside when you're done while we prepare the draping pieces. Fold each of your draping piece right side on right side and then pin and stitch lengthwise only with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance down to 1/4 inch to reduce bulk, turn inside out and press down. And it's time to add the back draping piece to the back bodice piece. So I had sewn my zip on first before realizing I was supposed to put the back drape first. So please ignore the already placed zip. Now the back drape is going to be on the side that has the falling fabric. So at the center back of this piece and starting about 3 inches up from the waistline, pin the top of the back draping piece and then keep pleating by folding it over itself, leaving some space in between the next pleat until you get your desired result and the end of the draping piece. Then smooth it over to the side like so and drape at the seam allowance of the side line. When you're happy with the result, turn your piece to the wrong side and cut off all excess draping fabric following the shape of your bodice. Then you will need to stitch the draped piece to the bodice at the ends with a 1/8 inch seam allowance to keep it in place. Then it's time to install your zip. So on the right side of your main back pieces, mark your 1 inch zipper allowance in from your center back. I've eyeballed mine in this case. And then pin your zip on one side, starting 1/2 inch in from the top, right side on right side, and with the teeth facing the bulk of the fabric. When you're done pinning, close the zip and locate where you have made notches at the center back. Transfer the notches to both sides of your zip with your Tailors chalk. Open your zip and pin it on the other back piece, right side on right side, with the teeth at the bulk of the fabric and matching notches. Now your zip needs to be long enough so that you can stitch to at least 4 inches past your waistline, so you can easily put on and take off the top. You'll be stitching on top the pleated draped piece at the center back where you draped. So go ahead and stitch very close to the teeth with your zipper foot, and also close the bottom when you're done, pressing open afterwards. Go ahead and drape the front as you did the back, this time from just under the armhole on one side to the waist of the other side. I used the picture to guide me. When you're done and you're happy with it, trim off the excess draping fabric and stitch down with a 1/8 inch seam allowance at the ends to keep it in place. Then on the main fabric with right side and right side, join the front and back bodies at the sides only with pins. You'll be stopping at the waistline on the side that has the extra fabric and sewing down to the end on the side that does not. Stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seam allowance open afterwards. Also join your lining fabric at the sides with pins, the same way you did the main fabric. Now on the side that does not have the extra fabric, leave a 5 to 8 inches wide gap along the side to be used as an entrance to hem the bodice. Sew all pinned areas together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, pressing your seam allowance open afterwards. Then join your main and lining pieces together at the neckline by laying them together right side on right side. Pin the front and back necklines together and also the bottom armhole that has the 1/2 inch seam allowance. Sew all pinned areas with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you're done, snip very close to the stitch line without cutting through and trim the sewn seam allowance to 1/4 inch. You should then understitch this by sewing the trimmed seam allowance to the lining. For the life of me, I cannot understand why I skipped this step, but don't skip this step, please. This will keep your lining in place and prevent it from shooting out unnecessarily. With right side of the lining fabric on right side of the main fabric, pin the zipper allowances together and stitch close to the teeth of the zip until you get to where you stopped on the main fabric. When you're done, go ahead and seal the bottom of the lining fabric. Then give your bodice a good press and turn it inside out to the right side. Now, on each side of the shoulders, you'll be joining your front and back shoulders, starting by marching and pinning the lining of the front and back pieces together all the way until you are now matching and pinning the front and back main fabric together. Do this on both sides and sew all pinned areas with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, trimming your seam allowance to 1/4 inch afterwards. Then completely seal your drop shoulder by grabbing the main and lining bottom part of the open armhole from the opening at the hem. And then, with right side on right side, go ahead and pin the lining and main fabric together. Afterwards, you'll be stitching with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Do this on both sides. When you're done, turn your garment to the right side and give it a good press. Next, from the opening you left at the side, grab the hem of your main and lining fabric, right side on right side, and pin from one side to either your front or back extra bit, and that is the part that falls. So you'll be sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now basically you want to pin and stitch one side at a time so that it doesn't get muddled up. When you're done, go ahead and trim your seam allowance round to 1/4 inch, trimming very close to the stitch line at the edges and marking notches very close to the stitch line at the curves like so. Then turn your bodice back to the right side from the gap made and pin the gap together. Go ahead and stitch the gap shut with a 1/8 inch seam allowance when you're done. And you're done! I am super excited about the turnout, even though I am still pinching myself as to why and how I skipped on the stitching. But I guess I'll have to be very intentional with my pressing to make sure I get the lining completely out of the way. Hope you can create yours after watching this, and I can't wait to see you next week. Now don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on your notification. Until next week, see you later.
Bye.